Everybody. So this week's chapter, last week we talked about voting. This week we're going to look at the parties that we'll be voting for a little bit more in depth. And so kind of look at, what the historic platforms of the Republicans and the Democrats have been here in Texas and their control over the state. So what are political parties for? Um, if you go back and read the U.S. Constitution, political parties are actually never mentioned in the Constitution. They're actually private organizations. They choose to run candidates and they fund candidates that, whose views align with their platform. But they are private organizations. It's just that these two parties are the two that have the most influence in our system. Um, some people tend to not like the idea of political parties, but there are three things that political parties do. One, they assist voters. You know, Parties do kind of help voters understand where they are in the political system, what they agree with, what they don't like. And it's kind of a shortcut to finding people who agree with your point of view. They facilitate party goals. So once you identify what it is that you stand for, the parties are there to help you form a coalition with other people. And then, of course, they run candidates so that they can control the structure and the process of government. And then our two main parties are Republicans, which are represented by the elephant and by the color red, and our Democrats, which are represented by the donkey and the color blue. They do kind of adhere to our main two political philosophies. Republicans tend to be conservative, and like we said, conservatives favor limited government, so small government, government that's not overstepping its authority, the free market, that government should stay out of business, that there should be low regulations, low taxation on business, and individual entrepreneurship, that we should make it as easy as possible for people to start a business, to encourage the growth of business, things like that. Liberals, on the other hand, believe that government has to be larger as a means to protect social equity. Or by social equity, we mean the idea that everyone should have the same chances to succeed, free from discrimination, prejudice, all of that kind of stuff. That only a government can protect our liberties and our civil rights and alleviate social problems like poverty, inequality, those types of things. So that's kind of the two main ideologies that our parties align with. But of course, we have everything from, the moderates in the middle to the extremes on either side. Now, also, simplifying the electoral college or electoral choice. I'm sorry, not electoral college. Like I said, parties are a shortcut. So when you go into the booth and you don't know who any of these people are on the ballot, a lot of times people are just going to look at that letter beside their name. Is it an R? Is it a D? There's my shortcut. So it gives me at least a kind of summarized view of what this person believes. Like we said, Republicans are most often conservative, Democrats are most often liberal, but how they express that can vary from state to state. Democrats in Texas. Now, this is changing a bit, and it changes based on age and race and things like that. But Democrats in Texas have tended to lean a little more moderate than, say, Democrats in California or New York. So even though someone identifies with a political party, they may not express it in the same way. Whereas your Democrats in California, may be anti-gun, want to ban certain types of guns and things like that. Democrats in Texas may not have as much desire to do that because Texas is a little bit different with its culture. So just because someone identifies with a party, how they identify with that party can vary from place to place. And then, of course, the most important goal of the political party is to run candidates for office. The more offices they control, the more influence they have over how government is run. And to do this, they provide candidates with expertise, money, logistics, strategy. To run a campaign, it takes a lot of effort. And so the political parties already exist with this infrastructure to help candidates win their elections. And so if you are the favored candidate of a particular party and they are the ones funding you and supporting you, you have a much greater chance of winning your election. So, what are the function of our political parties in addition to what we've talked about? Mobilizing voters is another one. So, a lot of these get out the vote drives that we'll see happening right now, a lot of those are sponsored by either the political parties themselves or interest groups that align with the political parties. On election day, you'll see different groups that are driving people to the polls and making sure people get out to vote. A lot of times the parties fund those activities as well. Um, and there's this thing, and it's more kind of like a psychological, sociological type concept, but people tend to be more motivated when they feel like they are part of a team. It's just kind of human nature. And so the parties give us a team to kind of align ourselves with. And so much like, people who are into football or basketball or whatever, the game's more exciting when their team is playing. People get that same rush from elections because when their party wins, they get really fired up. And when their party loses, they might be upset for a bit, but then that can fire them up to try harder next time. Um, Partisans are the people who we can predict how they're going to vote every election. These are, another name for partisans would be the base. So these are the people who are so committed and so aligned with their party that they would never consider voting for someone else. These are like your Trump supporters, Trump's base. They have made it very clear that they would only vote for him, and likely that would extend to the Republican Party as well. We saw this in 2016 with Bernie supporters, where they were so strongly committed to Bernie that they wouldn't even vote for Clinton. So these people are very entrenched in their particular beliefs. And sometimes they can push their party to the extreme ends of that political spectrum. So someone like Trump is definitely far more to the right than someone like Joe Biden for the Democrats, who is actually a little more towards center. So Trump has definitely had this effect of pushing Republicans kind of out to the margins of what being a conservative means. And then once candidates get elected to office, they use their influence to make sure that other party members are voting the way they want them to. So a good example where we're going to see this in the next few weeks, we all know sadly that Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg just passed away. And so you're going to see the Republicans coming out hard for other Republicans in the Senate to do what they're told, to vote to confirm a new justice to the Supreme Court, even though some of them have made these statements saying that, this close to an election, a justice shouldn't be voted on, et cetera, et cetera. So this is really going to test that commitment to Republican and partisan values. This is just a graph to kind of show you how the parties are organized. At the local level, we have precinct chairs, which commit to essentially kind of overseeing the election process at the smallest level, recruit volunteers, coordinate campaigns, do registration drives. If you want to get involved in politics, this is a good level of politics to get involved, to kind of get your feet wet. They are essentially making sure that candidates' names are out there and that the election is going to run smoothly. County chairs actually recruit candidates to run for office for regional positions. So if there's these people who are going around trying to identify people in the community who have a high likelihood of being successful if they run for office. recruit those people, manage funds, allocate those funds to people, and then oversee committees to make sure elections run smoothly, put new ideas out there, all that kind of stuff. And then at the state level, our state chairs essentially are establishing the party platform for all of that party's candidates in the state. And then, of course, they raise funds and manage funds. Money will always be important when we're talking about elections. And then there's the party conventions. And so you probably saw those this year. The conventions are always much bigger in presidential election years. We have the big shows, all the celebrities come out. Usually the Democrats convention is a little more entertaining because they have lots of, Hollywood celebrities and musicians and stuff like that. But these are big parties, and essentially these parties are to inform the voter of who their candidates are going to be, what their platform is going to be, what are the ideas that we're committing ourselves to for this election. And it confirms that the party is behind these candidates, that these are the people that we want for this office and this election cycle. And so all of the delegates at the convention will confirm the platform, the policies, all that kind of stuff. And essentially a big party to celebrate that party's particular success or future success and commit to their ideals. Now, this next one, because we're in an election year, I want you to take a look at this. This is a typical post that you would see on someone's Facebook in an election year. This one is actually from 2016. And so this one is comparing the party platforms. And this isn't a comprehensive list. It's just some highlights from 2016. So look at the Democratic side. Advocates for the reform of the criminal justice system, endorses tuition-free education, 12 weeks of paid family leave, increasing the minimum wage, amending the Constitution to reform campaign finance, adding a public option to health care through Obamacare, all that kind of stuff. Now look at the Republican side. Proposes that lawmakers use religion as a guide when legislating, endorses teaching the Bible in public schools, promotes state laws to limit public restroom use by transgender people, declares pornography a public health crisis, plans to overturn the Supreme Court decision that allowed same-sex marriage, and states that children with same-sex parents are more likely to become drug addicts. Now, what stands out about this post? Well, it is clearly biased. And so this is what you have to be careful about. The media that you're consuming this year as we get closer to the election. And you can see up here, it states these sources, that this information came from these sources. Well, it may have, but the way it's written, it's definitely written in a biased fashion. And then we've got a web address down here, and it's Democratic Underground, which is obviously going to be a partisan site. So you have to be careful with stuff like this. It's sneaky, and it's written in such a way that it definitely is biased toward the Democratic side, because everything that it talks about on that side is very positive. And then the way it frames the Republican platform is very negative. And so this is the kind of stuff that we as voters have to sift through and kind of, try to get to the real truth of these issues when we have an election coming up. Now, kind of looking at how the parties have kind of transitioned in Texas. So the Democrats actually have controlled Texas for the better part of our history. But when Franklin Roosevelt comes into power and uses the New Deal to expand the size of government, this actually causes a split in the Democratic Party. The more liberal Democrats are in favor of this. But we have conservative Democrats who have just been Democrats for a very long time out of tradition who don't like this idea of expanding the size and power of government. And a lot of people don't realize the New Deal was actually ruled unconstitutional initially by the Supreme Court. And so FDR actually makes some proposals that the president should be able to remove justices, add more justices, and things like that to get the New Deal through. This was supported by two two prominent Democrats from Texas, Lyndon Johnson and Sam Rayburn, senator and a House rep. Um, FDR's vice president, a Texan named John Nance Gardner, was more conservative and actually opposed this. And he was replaced in 1940. And so we see as we get into the 1950s, there is a split starting to occur in the Democratic Party where the more conservative Democrats actually support a Republican candidate for president, which is Dwight D. Eisenhower. And so we start to see a split here where after the 1950s, the more conservative Democrats will leave the Democratic Party and go to the Republican Party. And this is where that shift in the parties starts to become permanent, where Republicans are now the conservative party who favors small government, and our Democrats are the more liberal party that favor bigger government. And so, with the 1970s, with Richard Nixon, and through the 80s with Ronald Reagan, they pretty much solidify what the modern Republican Party platform is. And so, all of those former Democrats in rural areas and things like that, they have fully transitioned to being Republicans. Now, in Texas, for the better part of the 1800s and the beginning of the 20th century, Republicans were kind of a joke in Texas. They didn't really have a lot of influence, and you can attribute that to what happened with E.J. Davis, during Reconstruction and all of that. But Lyndon Johnson, he runs for president in 1960 against John F. Kennedy. Obviously, he doesn't get the nomination, and Kennedy offers him the opportunity to be vice president. So this leaves a vacancy in a Senate seat that had been controlled by a Democrat for pretty much all of Texas's history. 71 individuals throw their hat into this race, but a Republican named John Tower wins that seat. He is a Republican, and that seat has been controlled by a Republican ever since 1960. Like we said, Nixon and Reagan capitalize on this division in the Democratic Party, and they are able to drum up a lot of support in Texas. And so by the beginning of the 1980s, Texas really is now a Republican state. Bill Clements becomes governor in 1978, a Republican, and he uses his authority to lower taxes, reduce government, the size of government and bureaucracy, which makes Republicans really popular in Texas. Reagan chooses George H.W. Bush as his vice president, who is a Republican from Texas. And so by the 1980s, Texas is a Republican state. And then in the 2000s, we get an even more conservative branch of the Republican Party. Some of you may remember this, but the Tea Party comes to prominence during President Obama's term in office. The Tea Party, it's an acronym, TEA, stands for Taxed Enough Already. And so they use this iconography of the Boston Tea Party to essentially say that their taxes are too high, they're Republican, they don't like what President Obama's trying to do with the Affordable Care Act. And we see a lot of people who are Texas officials now elected under this Tea Party banner. And people like Ted Cruz, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, and the Tea Party really reaches its prominence around 2009 because of the protest happening over the Affordable Care Act. They don't really identify themselves as Tea Party Republicans anymore, but that's where this whole super conservative movement that kind of leads into Donald Trump, this is where it starts. Their platform, the Tea Party, they believe taxes are too high. They want taxes lowered. They want traditional family values, which of course we've said that when people say that, it's typically meaning Christian family values. Small government, gun rights, and oppose any kind of reform to the immigration system. Um, Now, party competition is what we're starting to see again in Texas. We're starting to see shifting in politics where Democrats are becoming competitive again in our state. Democrats are winning in our cities in the state of Texas. And so, um, cities have higher concentrations of population. It's where most of the economy is driven from, are the big cities. And so, this is a big thing that's driving change in the state of Texas. And one of the things that's at stake after this election is who gets to draw that new precinct map in 2021. After the U.S. Census, every 10 years, a state must reapportion, or what's called, or what this is redivide the districts so that people are guaranteed equal representation. So they go through a process of redistricting or redrawing the map. Now, that is the formal name for the process. But what has happened in the past is what we call gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is when the districts are drawn, like we said, to favor one party over the other. Gerrymandering is legal if it is done, you can gerrymander on the basis of party affiliation, but it is illegal to gerrymander on the basis of race. Now, what's difficult about that is that race and party affiliation have been heavily tied together in our country. We know since the 1960s, people of color, especially African Americans and Latinos, have been heavily associated to the Democratic Party, and we know that the Republican Party is still made up of a majority of white citizens. So to make an argument that gerrymandering is not done on the basis of race is difficult. And Texas, our map that was drawn in 2000 and our map that was drawn in 2010 were both challenged in the court. The Supreme Court upheld the 2000 map, even though there were two different challenges to it. But the 2010 map, the map that we currently are using, has been challenged and modified because it was found to be discriminatory against Latinos. And one of the counties that was found to be the most gerrymandered was Tarrant County. In 2015, this case, Evenwell versus Abbott, Texas was ordered to redraw the map based on total population, not just registered voters. Again, the census counts all people living in the United States, not just citizens, not just registered voters, and those are the numbers that have to be used for drawing these districts. In June of last year, 2019, the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 that they had no constitutional authority to limit partisan gerrymandering. So, again, the court says in 2019 that states can do this on the basis of party affiliation, but not if it is discriminatory on the basis of race. And there's a link here to a really good video that kind of explains how gerrymandering works, so I highly recommend watching that. And then this slide is a look at the map in Texas. And so if you look at most of the state, the districts are really big out here in West Texas because it's not as densely populated. But when you zoom in on urban areas, you can see how crazy the maps can get. So here's Tarrant County. Why does this one district cross Dallas and Tarrant County? Now, if you overlaid that map over a population map, that district 33 is heavily drawn to put all African Americans into one district. So therefore, it reduces their influence by putting all African Americans in one district. They only get one representative rather than spreading them out and making the other districts competitive. Here's San Antonio, Bexar County. Here's Travis County. I believe this is Harris County. So you can see in the cities, the shapes get really crazy. And if you lay these over population maps that are drawn on demographics, they heavily correspond to where people of color live. And so this is why our maps have been ruled unconstitutional a few times here in the state of Texas. Now, looking at some third parties, third parties have a very difficult chance of being successful. One reason being, we talked about the winner-take-all election. So in most states, the two-party system makes it hard for third parties to be successful because to win, whether it's the presidential election or other elections decided by a popular vote, it's a winner take all system. The candidate with the most votes wins, and third parties rarely get enough votes to be competitive. Political scientists have argued that winner take all system it essentially fosters a two party system, and we call this Duverger's law. But yeah, as long as we have the winner take all system that we have, and we don't have proportional systems or ranked choice voting and things like that, it will continue to reinforce the power of the two party system. Now, we did have one third party that had some success in the 1970s, the La Raza Unida Party, which means the United Race. And this was a group of Latino Democrats who felt that the Democrats were not being responsive to their issues and their concerns in government. So essentially, they form what's called a protest party. And so they pull their support away from Democrats, and they're able to beat Democrats in a lot of local elections like school board, county court, city council, and things like that. But they were able to pull enough votes away from Democrats that in 1978, Bill Clements wins the governor's office. And so it makes it very apparent to Democrats that they can't be competitive in the state of Texas without the Latino vote. And so by 1982, Democrats change their platform, integrate the issues of Latinos, and many of those Latinos that formed the La Raza Unida Party come back to the Democratic Party. Today, our most successful third party is the Libertarian Party. The Libertarian Party, some of you may identify as Libertarian. This little tagline on this picture kind of sums up their beliefs. Keeping Republicans out of your bedroom and Democrats out of your wallet since 1971. Libertarians favor personal liberty above all else. They want as little involvement from government as possible. Some of your most extreme libertarians believe that taxation is theft, but essentially they believe in the freedom of choice and individual judgment, that people should be able to make up their own minds whether something is good or bad for them, and the government shouldn't be involved in that decision. Now, some people do take this to the extreme as far as like saying, oh, I don't need a driver's license to drive or a deed to own property and things like that, but that's kind of the extreme end of the Libertarian Party. The Libertarian Party is for limited welfare. They don't like government spending, free market, low regulation on business, small government. But when it comes to social issues, personal issues of personal freedom like sexuality, smoking marijuana, things like that, they also believe the government should stay out of those issues as well. So they are kind of in the middle, though most of your libertarians in Texas tend to lean a little more to the right than to the left. The other third party you might see on the ballot is the Green Party. The Green Party is kind of more to the left of the Democratic Party, and they tend to focus on one issue, which is the environment. So protecting the environment guides all of their other policies. So protecting the environment, local control of communities, nonviolent social justice, election reform, universal voter registration, universal health care, tax corporations, legalize medical marijuana, and abolish the death penalty. Now, they're not too different than someone like Bernie Sanders, and so a lot of Green Party supporters are kind of towing that line of being democratic socialists like Bernie Sanders. But a lot of their platform is built around environmental issues. And so sometimes people are kind of wary of the Green Party because of their focus on the environment. They don't really have a lot of policy for other things. And so when you're focused on one issue as drastically as the Green Party is, sometimes it doesn't build confidence in your ability to govern all of government. So that's why they don't really see much success. The only place you'll probably see the Green Party on a ballot in Texas is in the race for president. They do usually run a candidate for president In every election, they've been on the ballot since 2000. So that will probably be the only place you'll see the Green Party in Texas. And this last picture is just to sum up, pretty much where we are in government today.